Hey guys, tonight we're headed deep into the Persian desert. Not for battle, not for buried treasure, but for dessert. Imagine, you're standing in a sun-bleached landscape, the horizon blurred with heat waves, and in your hand is a bowl of delicately chilled, rose-scented sorbet. You didn't bring it in a cooler. There are no ice cubes clinking in a thermos, and yet it's refreshingly cold. How? Tonight, we'll be wandering gently through the surprisingly cool history of ancient Persian ice storage. How entire communities work together across seasons and cities to trap winter in a jar and spoon it out, one scoop at a time, in the heart of summer. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of heat with your modern comforts stripped away, but tonight you don't have to. You just have to drift slowly through time, listening as ancient ingenuity unfolds around you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through sand, the wind pressing soft grit into your clothing, the smell of dried herbs and dust thick in your nose. A trader trudges past, his donkey carrying sacks of salt and a small clay-sealed jar wrapped in wool. Cold, he insists, even now. You squint at the horizon. There's something strange in the distance, like an upside-down cone, rounded at the top, planted right in the desert floor. It's not a mirage, it's a yakchal. You're not impressed yet. It looks like an oddly shaped silo, or maybe a temple having a bit of an identity crisis. The surface is pale, almost pink, mottled, with mud and bits of straw. It gives off a faint smell of clay and old water. There's a narrow entrance with a thick wooden door slightly ajar. A boy runs in with a bucket. A woman follows him with a bundle of herbs and something wrapped in linen. Inside, it's dark. The air hits you. Damp. Cool, a faint whisper of chill against your cheeks. You're still sweating, but your body registers the difference. It's like stepping into a shaded garden or cracking open a cellar door on a summer afternoon. You didn't expect it. The structure doesn't have wires, metal coils, or any buzzing machinery, and yet, here it is, cooler than the inside of your own fridge back home during a blackout. You step further in, your feet crunching over sand and straw. A slight breeze moves through. A draft? Maybe something more. You'll learn about the wind catchers later, but for now, you just feel the quietness of the place. It's insulated, not by foam or fiberglass, but by walls as thick as a grown man is tall, made of something called sarouj, a blend of clay, sand, ash, egg whites, goat, hair, and lime. Everything sticky, breathable, and just porous enough to hold the cold inside. At the center is a pit, deep, maybe 15 feet across and 20 down. It's empty now, but there's a story in those walls. Stained lines where straw used to be packed with ice, where food was stored in clay pots to stay fresh, even in the dead heat of Tyr, the 4th month in the Persian calendar. You sit at the edge and dangle your feet. The walls feel like they could talk. Maybe they're whispering already, in the voice of every mother who preserved milk, every worker who lowered a snow-wrapped melon into the depths. Historians still argue whether yakchals were first used primarily for food storage or ceremonial cooling. Some point to records of ice offered at royal feasts, others to everyday households with a spoonful of frozen honey tucked in a nook. But one thing's agreed upon: the idea of keeping winter alive, of coaxing snow into summer, mattered enough to shape architecture. You take a slow breath, catching the faintest scent of rosewater left behind from a feast, maybe a festival. There's no sound in here except the occasional sigh of the wind as it slides over the dome. The way it's built, it hums softly like a seashell at your ear. You lean back against the wall, letting it support your weight. It's cool, surprisingly solid. Someone spent months building this, layering mud and straw, measuring shadows, watching stars. The Persians weren't just building storage. They were building with patience, waiting for the desert to cooperate, letting nature do the work. slowly, over time. And you're just along for the ride. A child skips in, barefoot, with a bundle of herbs, mint, basil, and something else fragrant, wrapped in a cloth that's damp and cool. He places it by the wall and runs back out. You wonder how many people use this place each day, how much of the city depends on a room built to outlast the sun. There's a bowl nearby, glazed with chipped edges. It's still damp inside, and when you press a finger to the rim, you swear it's colder than your skin. Someone ate sorbet here, probably with pomegranate seeds or shaved ice soaked in sour cherry syrup. You imagine the taste, a gentle burst of sweetness, a bite of chill, a surprise in every mouthful. The door creaks. Another breeze flows in. You stay where you are, letting the quiet surround you. Out in the real world, you'd be overheating. You'd be pressing buttons, fiddling, with fans, searching for an AC remote buried under couch cushions. But here, in the middle of a sun-drenched nowhere, you're cooler than you have any right to be. Maybe that's the point. In ancient Persia, the heat wasn't the enemy. It was the canvas. They didn't fight it. They worked with it, bending wind, water, clay, and time to shape something simple, useful, and unexpectedly elegant. Your eyes adjust to the low light. Shadows stretch like silk across the walls. Everything feels deliberate. Every line of the dome, every curve of the pit. A geometry of comfort. Outside it's still blazing, but here, inside the yakchal, time slows. Heat fades, and somewhere, just beneath your feet, lies the promise of a cold treat, waiting. You wake slowly, if you ever fell asleep at all. The chill still hangs in the air like a memory you can feel on your skin. As your eyes adjust, the doorway glows a little brighter. Daylight, sharpening against the curved silhouette of the entrance. You rise, careful not to bump your head, and make your way back into the warmth. The sun hits you like a warm, wet cloth. Oppressive but expected. You squint and shade your eyes with your hand, taking one last look at the domed structure behind you. The yakchal stands quietly, squat and sturdy against the horizon. Its beehive shape isn't just quirky architecture, it's physics with flair. That domed form isn't an accident. It's designed to shade itself, to minimize heat absorption while maximizing airflow. A sun-proof shelter that looks like a minimalist piece of dessert pottery. If that pottery was 60 feet tall and buried halfway in sand. Your guide appears, a man with a beard like braided smoke and eyes that have seen too many summers. He points to the top of the dome with his walking stick. That, he says slowly, is how you start cooling a desert. You blink at him, half drowsy, half amused. He chuckles and begins to walk, expecting you to follow. The outer surface of the dome is covered in a special blend, a mix of clay, sand, goat hair, ash, and lime. You're told the technical term is saruj. Not exactly the kind of thing you'd find at a modern hardware store, but this concoction was the Persian Empire's version of all-weather paint. It's highly water-resistant, insulating, and incredibly long-lasting. So long-lasting, in fact, that some of the original yakchals from 2,000 years ago still exist, and you haven't even managed to keep your air fryer's non-stick coating from flaking off. Historians still argue whether this clever mix was developed specifically for ice domes or borrowed from earlier kiln-building techniques. Some believe it evolved through sheer trial and error. Others, that it came from the Zoroastrians' temple maintenance rituals, where fire and water had to be kept in harmony. Either way, saruj is a forgotten marvel. You circle the structure now, noticing tiny intentional details. Angled vents cut high into the dome, shallow ridges along its curves, and a small channel running from the base off into the dusty earth. That channel? It once carried meltwater, collected and reused in nearby gardens. Nothing wasted. Every drop of winter sweat reclaimed for summer tomatoes. A young girl joins you, her arms full of broken straw and clay chunks. She's patching a section of the dome where the last rain had worn a soft groove into the surface. She hums while she works, pressing her feet into the clay mixture, shaping it with her palms like bread dough. Her fingers move in circular patterns, slow, methodical. You feel your own breathing fall into rhythm with hers. Your guide hands you a chunk of straw. "Help her," he says, but there's no urgency. The sun is high, but time here feels curved, like the dome itself, smooth and unconcerned with speed. You kneel. Your hands meet the warm, coarse material. It smells like dust and dried herbs, and something vaguely sweet. Maybe old honey. You press it into a crack on the outer surface. It's not art, but it sticks. The girl nods once, satisfied. "Do it slow," she says, "or it won't breathe right." "Breathe?" You raise an eyebrow. "The dome," she explains, "isn't just insulation. It's a living breathing system. Air flows through it like blood through veins, drawing heat up, letting coolness settle below. If the dome's curves are wrong or its skin too thick, the air won't circulate. It'll trap warmth instead of shedding it. So yes, it breathes, like a camel, like the wind." And speaking of wind, the guide beckons you away from the dome's base and points to a tall shaft not far off. Thin, square, rising like a chimney into the sky, chimney into the sky. "That," he says, "is the next trick. But we'll get there." For now, you sit again, watching the dome do nothing, and everything. It reflects the light just enough to stay cool. It captures every passing breeze, every hint of shade. You find yourself oddly jealous of how well it knows its environment. In your own time, people build square boxes and fight with thermostats. Here, they built domes and let the sky do half the work. You spot a thin line of camels moving across the horizon, their slow pace barely disturbing the silence. The girl stands beside you now, brushing dried clay from her arms. "You like sweet ice?" she asks. You nod. She grins. "Then you help more. More dome, more ice." You laugh, but you get it. This isn't a personal freezer, it's a community one, and maintaining it is everyone's job, from poets to potters to sleepy tourists like you. As you stand, brushing sand from your knees, the guide looks skyward and mutters something in Farsi. Something about clouds, or maybe lack thereof. You don't catch it all, but the way he nods at the dome again, you know what he means. It'll be hot this week. Good thing the freezer's full. You leave the yakchor behind, though it lingers in your body like a cooled memory. A part of you imagines pressing your cheek to its wall one last time, just to feel that breath of ancient chill again. But the guide is already a few steps ahead, and so you follow. Through dusty paths lined with low adobe walls, past sleepy goats, and the faint smell of baking flatbread curling through the air. He's leading you somewhere specific, though he doesn't say where. You get the sense he doesn't need to. The path knows. You pass a pair of boys flicking date pits at each other with alarming precision, and an old man balancing an enormous platter of dried fruit on his head, like it's a third eye. Then, you hear it. Not a sound exactly, but an absence. An odd quiet in the air, cooler and more focused. You round a corner, and there it is. A wind catcher, a badger, as it's called in Persian. It rises from the roof of a mud brick home like a rectangular lighthouse without a flame. 4 open slats at the top, each facing a cardinal direction, make it look like a chimney that got lost on its way to a rooftop barbecue. But this is air conditioning from 1,000 years ago. You squint upward. It's tall, at least 30 feet, and built into the house itself. There's no glass, no screen, no filter. Yet you feel a slow, lazy breeze ripple past your cheeks, like the earth itself just exhaled. The guide claps his hands once. "Cool from the sky," he says, smiling. "Here's how it works," he explains, or at least how people think it works. Historians still argue whether the original wind catchers use suction, pressure differential, or simply the art of getting lucky with desert winds. But the result is the same. Air enters those tall slats, gets funneled down the shaft, and passes over water, maybe a small pool, maybe damp mats, before cooling the space below. The temperature inside drops by as much as 10 or even 15 degrees. Celsius. No electricity, no humming compressors, just geometry and a deep respect for airflow. You enter the house. Instantly, it feels different. Calm, like stepping into a library or a well-kept secret. A family sits on a woven rug beneath the central shaft, sipping sweet tea and barely sweating. Overhead, the Badgier's hollow tower catches every errant breeze, bending it like an obliging servant, delivering it precisely where it's needed. You're handed a bowl of something pale green. It's called faluda. Frozen starch noodles soaked in rosewater and lime juice. It shivers in your hand, almost trembling with cold. You take a bite. It melts slowly on your tongue. Sweet, floral, a bit like eating perfume if perfume decided to behave for once. It's not just refreshing, it's improbable. "You're eating wind," says the eldest woman in the room. Her eyes twinkle behind her tea glass, and she's not wrong. Everything about this treat, its coolness, its storage, its preparation, relies on air and patience and shade. The idea that wind itself, when guided and listened to, can make dessert possible. In the corner, a copper basin holds melting chunks of ice, likely brought in from the dome you visited earlier. The family takes turns shaving it into bowls, mixing it with crushed fruit, herbs, or sometimes vinegar and honey. The kids laugh every time someone bites into a piece that's too cold, clutching their jaws in mock agony. You smile. Some problems never change. But even the ice had to get here somehow. You ask about that. The woman nods slowly and gestures for you to sit. She begins a story in the slow, winding cadence of someone used to talking in the rhythm of sunsets and rising bread. In the coldest months, she says, men would gather in the dead of night to harvest. Ice, not from mountain peaks, but from man-made pools called ice gardens. Shallow, rectangular basins dug near the Yakchal and filled with water, exposed just enough to the freezing desert night. The desert, surprisingly, gets brutally cold in winter. Water freezes in thin sheets. At dawn, the men collect these sheets, stack them carefully, and carry them to the dome, layering them with straw and burlap like pastry. It's delicate work. The ice must be thin to freeze quickly and cleanly, but thick enough to carry without cracking. The process takes weeks, sometimes months, and the ice is added layer by layer, like assembling a glacial lasagna. This is how winter is captured. You close your eyes and imagine it. The quiet creak of leather boots in the snow-hardened sand, the shimmer of moonlight on frozen water, the hiss of frost as it's lifted into baskets, and always, the rush to beat the sun. Some years, she says softly, the ice cracked too early, or the snow didn't come. Then the summers were long indeed. She doesn't need to explain. You've had hot days without relief. But here, the lack of a proper frozen dessert could shift an entire season's mood. Historians still debate whether these ice gardens were purely practical or part of a broader cultural ritual, whether the collection itself was meant to mirror the cycles of death and renewal, but everyone agrees these were communal events. Even children had roles, watching the straw bundles, fetching water, or just staying out of the way without tripping into a freezing pond. You open your eyes. The breeze from the windcatcher rustles the edge of your tunic. Someone has placed another bowl of faluda near your elbow. This one has crushed mulberries. You take another bite. The house hums softly around you, not with noise, but with intention. Every brick, every reed mat, every shadow has been arranged with purpose, and as the wind flows down from above, cooling your cheek and stirring your hair, you begin to understand. The Yakchal wasn't just a building. The windcatcher isn't just a tower. They're part of a conversation. A long, slow, dusty conversation between sun and stone, between wind and want. And for tonight at least, you're welcome to listen. You emerge from the windcatcher-cooled home feeling slightly dazed, like you've wandered out of a dream where someone bottled winter and passed it around in clay cups. The sun hasn't gone anywhere. It hangs high and lazy in the sky. but your skin still carries the memory of shade and whispering air. You stretch, yawn, and follow the guide again, though by now he barely gestures. You've become attuned to the pace of this place. The path curves gently toward what looks like a sunken field bordered by low stone walls. Nothing grows here. Not wheat, not dates, not the figs you saw drying in baskets earlier. Instead, it's just sand and dust. But the shape is too precise to be accidental. A long, shallow rectangle, maybe 2 feet deep. A pool without water. You've arrived at an ice garden. The guide says nothing at first. He simply walks to the center, plants his walking stick into the dry floor, and draws a slow circle around it with his toe. You step closer, scanning the sunken space. At first glance, it's empty, but your guide begins to speak again, and suddenly, it's alive. This, he says, is where winter is farmed. You almost laugh. It sounds ridiculous. But then, so does freezing water in a desert and eating noodles made of starch and perfume. He points toward the low stone wall on the far side. That side is always in shadow first, he says. The wind runs this way at night. So, the ice begins here. He traces a line across the garden with his stick. Then here. Then here. You try to imagine it. The shallow basin filled, in the late afternoon with clean water, collected from distant kanats, filtered through gravel and patience. The water lies still, unbothered by birds or children, left to wait for the freezing breath of desert night. As dusk falls, temperatures plummet. Out here, without the city's warmth or the sun's embrace, the air gets cruel quickly. You've probably read that deserts are cold at night, but knowing it and feeling it are not the same thing. These nights bite, and yet they are perfect. For this peculiar ritual, each night a thin layer of ice forms on the surface. By morning, it's solid enough to be lifted, delicately, like peeling glass off a mirror. Workers move with quiet urgency, stacking the sheets in donkey carts or directly into the yak chal. The guide taps a spot near the corner of the basin. One year, it rained too early, froze mid-pour. We called it the frozen flood. He smiles, the corners of his eyes creasing. Looked like someone had tried to make soup out of stars. Historians still argue whether ice gardens like this were primarily built by royal decree. Some believe they were managed exclusively for the elite, or whether smaller towns developed their own, unofficial versions. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The empire had standards, but local ingenuity filled in the cracks. And speaking of ingenuity, your guide turns to a small shaded alcove near the basin's edge. Inside, bundled under layers of old cloth, are tools. Simple ones. Wooden sleds, wide paddles, baskets lined with straw. All of it hand-carved, smoothed, by time. These, he says, were the ice farmer's hands. He lifts a paddle and hands it to you. It's heavier than you expect, worn smooth by years of scooping water and prying frozen sheets from the surface. There are faint carvings along the handle, possibly decorative, possibly just idle doodles. Either way, it's clear someone held this tool long enough to make it their own. You kneel beside the basin, tracing the grooves in the stone wall. Why not dig deeper, you ask? Why keep the garden so shallow? He raises an eyebrow. Too deep, water doesn't freeze, or it freezes unevenly. He holds up his palm, flat. Thin is fast, thin is clean. You nod, like window panes of winter. Then, you notice something odd. A small clay figurine tucked into the stone wall, half buried, its painted face just barely visible. A woman, maybe, or a bird. The guide sees you staring and shrugs. Offerings, he says. Superstition, some say. But even engineers like a little magic. You smile. Even in ancient Persia, people hedged their bets. Science by day, charms by night. He continues. On cold nights, some would sing while they worked. Not prayers, just songs, to keep the ice from cracking. You imagine it now. Dozens of workers, breath rising in silver clouds, voices low and tired, singing to sheets of ice under a moonlit sky, a midnight harvest where the crop is silence. One night, the guide adds, a fox fell into the basin, slid right in, couldn't get out. They found it frozen in place the next morning, curled like a sleeping cat, eyes shut. He chuckles softly. We built a little dome over that spot, called it the Fox's Corner. Another layer of charm, another layer of chill. You look across the basin again, and though there's no ice here today, no water, no workers, you swear you can feel the say. Cold ghost of it, like your breath might fog if you stood still long enough. Eventually, you rise. The guide offers you a dried apricot, and you take it without thinking. It's tart and chewy, grounding you back in the present. The garden is empty. The sun is hot, but winter once lived here, tended gently by hands with straw-lined baskets, and hopes that the frost would be kind. And in a few months, when the air cools again, they'll fill the basin once more, waiting for the sky to do its part. You brush your hands off and begin walking again. Your footsteps slow, deliberate, like someone who's begun to understand that time doesn't always move in straight lines, especially not in a place where ice blooms from nothing. You're not sure how long you've been walking now, but the terrain starts to shift beneath your sandals. The packed earth of the village paths softens into a light, sandy dust that clings to your steps and kicks up in little swirls behind you. The guide doesn't say where you're going next. He simply gestures to the horizon, where a line of hills shimmer like a mirage. But you're learning that in this part of the world, answers arrive slowly, often wrapped in a layer of sun and silence. As you walk, he begins humming, an off-key tune with no apparent structure. You catch only fragments, a few rising notes, a trailing hum. It feels ancient, or at least patient, like a song that doesn't care if anyone listens. Then, up ahead, the ground dips again. This time, it isn't a basin or a building. It's a hole, long, narrow, and meticulously reinforced with bricks. At first glance, it might look like a well, but it stretches horizontally rather than plunging straight down. Your guide waves his hand dramatically and declares, "Behold, the qanat." You peer inside. Cool air flows faintly from its opening, brushing your face like a secret. The tunnel disappears into darkness, perfectly aligned, perfectly deliberate. A qanat, he explains, is a feat of underground engineering dating back thousands of years. A sloped tunnel carved into the earth, starting from an upland aquifer and stretching miles underground to deliver fresh water to the parched cities and fields below. No pumps, no pipes, just gravity and grit. You squat beside the entrance and squint. Inside, you see the faint glimmer of dampness, the echo of water trickling through the shadows. The tunnel is surprisingly small, just wide enough for a person to crawl through, if that person didn't mind tight spaces and the distinct possibility of meeting a disgruntled bat or two. Historians still argue whether the earliest qanats originated in Persia or if the idea came from even older Mesopotamian channels, but everyone agrees that it was the Persian Empire that refined the art into something astonishing. Each qanat could stretch for miles, quiet, invisible rivers beneath your feet. Above ground, vertical shafts were dug every few hundred feet, like ventilation chimneys, to allow workers access for digging and maintenance. From above, the system looks like a row of evenly spaced wells. From below, it's a miracle of math and pickaxes. You look up and realize you're standing in the middle of what was once a qanat access shaft. It's been dry for years, but the evidence remains. Smooth brick lining, faint mineral stains, the long curve of patience carved into earth. Your guide kneels beside a nearby bush and pulls aside a patch of stone to reveal a miniature irrigation channel, no wider than your palm. Still works, he says, and places a leaf into the flow. You watch it drift lazily along the channel, making its way toward a grove of pomegranate trees in the distance. This water, he explains, might be 50 years old. You blink. He nods, satisfied by your confusion. Water in a kanat moves slowly, just a few feet per hour in some places. From the time it begins its journey in the mountain aquifer, it might take decades to reach its final destination. A slow motion, river beneath your feet, feeding fields and families long after it set off on its silent journey. You sit on a flat rock nearby, overwhelmed by the sheer deliberateness of it all. Someone dug this. Someone measured every inch, aligned every slope, and calculated every fraction of a degree, centuries before spirit levels or calculators or YouTube tutorials. And they did it not for glory or conquest, but so someone, someday, could drink tea under a fig tree. Nearby, your guide points to a cluster of date palms. They say the best dates grow over a kanat. You raise an eyebrow. Why? He grins. Because they drink the earth's memory. You laugh, not because it makes sense, but because it doesn't have to. Kanats were the lifelines of ancient Persian cities. Without them, there would be no ice gardens, no wind catchers, no faluda shimmering in your bowl. Just dry wind and broken pottery. With them, entire ecosystems could flourish in defiance of the sun. In some towns, you're told, water from the kanat was stored in special underground chambers before being lifted bucket by bucket for daily use. In others, it was channeled directly into mosques, bathhouses, or private homes. Elite families might even boast of having their own tap fed by a private kanat branch, an ancient form of bragging rights. You reach into the channel and let the water run over your fingers. It's cold, not icy, but startling against the heat. Somewhere, far away, a mountain is slowly giving up this water, drip by drip, inch by inch. And here it is, cooling your skin like it arrived just for you. There's an odd comfort in knowing that something so small, so slow, could still matter, could still change things. In a world obsessed with speed, the kanat feels like a gentle rebuke, a reminder that good things don't just come to those who wait. They come to those who build for someone else's future. You stand, brushing dust from your clothes, and take one last look down the tunnel. It hums with quiet purpose. Not a roar, not a rush. Just the sound of time, flowing. And as you follow your guide toward the next story, the breeze carries with it a faint trace of damp stone and cold water, like a secret, still being whispered beneath your feet. The desert is never still. You might expect silence out here, some grand hush over the sand and stone. But the truth is, it hums, a low murmur of wind moving over rock, of beetles clicking through dry grass, of far-off birds declaring territorial disputes no one else seems to care about. It's not loud. It's just always there. You trail behind your guide, your steps, now coated with a fine dust that clings to the edges of your sandals. He's veered off the main path, which wasn't really a path to begin with, and now you find yourself stepping carefully between rounded mounds, half-collapsed domes of packed earth and brick. They rise from the landscape like sleeping giants, part architecture, part mirage. One of them stands taller than the others. Your guide makes a soft clicking sound in his throat, then waves his hand toward it like a magician unveiling his grandest illusion. The Yakchal, he says, as though it needs no further explanation, and maybe it doesn't. You know the word now, literally ice pit in Persian, but standing here before one for the first time, the term feels a bit modest. The structure rises nearly 60 feet into the sky, its conical body both alien and familiar. It's smooth and angled, built to deflect sunlight and kiss the wind just right. A primitive freezer with a PhD in thermodynamics. You approach slowly. Its surface is rough, packed with mud and straw, pounded again and again until it hardened into an ancient form of concrete. You reach out to touch it, and it's surprisingly cool, even under the midday sun. Somehow, this strange, sand-colored mountain seems to exhale cold, exhale cold. Your guide gestures for you to follow, and together you duck through a narrow opening at its base. The temperature drops instantly, like you've crossed some invisible boundary. Inside, it's dark and still, the air dense with the scent of clay and memory. You're standing inside a hollow cone, its walls sloping upward in graceful curves. Light filters through a few slits near the top, creating soft columns that catch the drifting dust. At the center is the pit, a wide, deep hole where ice was once stored in thick slabs, layered between straw and cooled by evaporation. You could store ice here all year, your guide whispers, as though the structure might wake if spoken to too loudly. And he's right. The Yakchol worked on a few simple, brilliant principles. Its thick walls provided insulation. The cone shape encouraged warm air to rise and escape. The underground pit stayed cool, thanks to the canut-fed water channels beneath it, and the clever ventilation system kept everything dry enough to prevent melting. Ice could survive through the inferno of summer. Historians still argue over whether these structures were used exclusively for preserving ice, or also for storing food, like meat, dairy, or even faluda. Some believe that wealthier families might have used smaller, private yakchals for personal storage, ancient backyard fridges, if you will. But this was a public vault. Ice gathered from the gardens, brought here at dawn in straw-lined carts, stacked with ritualistic precision. Straw, ice, straw, ice. Every layer intentional. Every creak of the wheelbarrow, a note in the song of survival. Your guide sits cross-legged on the ground, as if he too has cooled enough to rest. During the hottest days, he says, people would gather near the base, just to sit, not even to touch the ice, just to be near it. You nod. You get it. It's like standing in the fridge with the door open during a heat wave, except instead of guilt and humming electricity, here you get silence, ancient bricks, and the faintest breeze from a 1,000-year-old ventilation shaft. There's a small nook carved into one wall, an alcove, just big enough for a lantern or a set of tools. Inside, someone long ago scratched a phrase in old Persian script. Your guide translates it with a smile. Cold is kindness. You pause. Let it echo. Cold is kindness. A strange philosophy for a desert culture, but also perfectly logical. In a place where heat could crack stone and shrivel crops, ice wasn't just a luxury, it was mercy. A sign that someone had planned ahead, cared, enough to dig tunnels, carve basins, and bake mud bricks under the angry eye of the sun. You sit beside the pit, closing your eyes for a moment. The quiet settles over you like a blanket. You imagine the workers, stooped, sweating, laughing, hauling blocks of ice, slipping them into the dark, hoping they'd still be there when the apricot trees bloomed again. Someone claps their hands. Outside. A boy, maybe. A flash of white cloth. Then he's gone again. The spell isn't broken, just shifted. Your guide stands slowly and points upward. On some nights, he says, people would climb to the top and watch the stars. You look at the angled walls. It seems impossible, but he insists. The breeze was best up there, and the dome. He pauses, searching for the word. The dome makes the sky feel closer. You tilt your head back and see the faint slice of blue through the shaft. He's right. The opening frames the heavens like a painting. Stars, not scattered but arranged. If you stayed long enough, maybe the dome would breathe out constellations. Before you leave, he picks up a stone and drops it into the pit. You count the seconds before the soft thud. Not bottomless, but deep enough to make you respect its stillness. Back outside, the sun hits you like a curtain pulled back, but your skin holds onto the coolness of the yakchal, and for a few precious minutes, you are neither here nor there, just suspended between fire and frost. As you walk away, you glance back at the dome, rising serene and unbothered. Not a building, not a ruin, but a promise, held in clay. Cold is kindness. And kindness, you think, takes a surprising amount of planning. By now, your sandals are more dust than leather. and your sense of time has stretched into something soft and unmeasurable, like the edges of a nap you almost remember. The path leads you downhill again, toward a low-lying orchard where the trees huddle close together, their leaves whispering in the wind like old conspirators. Your guide doesn't speak much anymore. He only gestures, offering you an open hand, now and then, like a magician pulling invisible threads through the desert air. You follow. Beyond the orchard, something strange catches your eye. A rectangular pond, shallow and still, like a giant mirror set into the earth. It doesn't ripple. It doesn't steam, but it seems unnaturally calm. This, your guide says, is where the ice was made. You blink. You're standing in the middle of a desert. The idea of making ice here, let alone doing it reliably, feels like something out of a half-remembered bedtime story. And yet, here it is. The ice-making pool, a key part of the ancient Persian process for harvesting winter cold. The trick, as it turns out, was less about brute force and more about timing and a bit of cunning. Each winter, during the coldest desert nights, water from nearby qanats was diverted into wide, shallow pools like this one. These pools were built with thick, clay-lined bottoms to minimize heat retention and carefully shaded by high mud walls to block sunlight during the day. Then nature did the rest. Because of the desert's dramatic temperature swings, scorching days and bone-chilling nights, the water would freeze over by dawn. Workers would then break the thin ice sheets, haul them off in carts, and store them deep in the yakchols. This process would be repeated night after night during the winter months, slowly building up the year's precious supply of ice. It's one of those moments where you realize just how brilliant the whole system was. They weren't trying to fight nature. They were working with it, coaxing it, persuading it, night by night, to do them this small favor. Historians still argue whether the technique was originally invented in Persia or borrowed from colder climates and adapted here. But one thing is certain. No other desert society produced and stored this much ice with this level of consistency and elegance. You crouch near the pond, running your fingers along its cool clay edge. The surface is clean now, dry and a little cracked, but you can still imagine the routine. The workers rising in the dark, bundled in wool, stomping across frozen ground with torches in hand, carefully scooping each sheet of ice, breaking it, with padded mallets so as not to waste a single chunk. Someone inevitably slipping and landing in the pond with a splash and a curse, sending the others into hushed laughter. You glance at the mud brick walls surrounding the pool. They're taller than they need to be, casting long, angular shadows even now. Their purpose wasn't just shade, they also blocked the wind, reducing convection and ensuring the water would freeze faster. In other words, these walls weren't just about temperature, they were about control. The more you learn, the more it becomes clear. The ancient Persians weren't just surviving the desert, they were mastering it. Your guide sits on a nearby stump and begins peeling a fig, slowly, with the kind of deliberation usually reserved for monks or cats. They say, he offers between bites, that a child born in Yazd could taste ice before he learned to write. You laugh softly. Lucky kid, he shrugs. Or unlucky. He'd grow up expecting miracles. A lizard skitters across the path behind you, tail twitching. The pond holds its silence. You run your hand across the clay again, and for a moment, you swear it's cooler than it should be, like the memory of ice has soaked into the walls and refuses to leave. In one corner, there's a rusted metal hook embedded in the brick, a remnant of the pulley system once used to move ice blocks. You tug on it gently. It holds fast. Even now, it clings. It's easy to romanticize the past when you're standing in a place like this, to picture robed figures moving through moonlight, to imagine whispered jokes shared over straw-wrapped ice bricks. But it wasn't all poetic. These workers rose in the cold, handled freezing water with bare hands, and moved literal tons of weight with nothing but brute force and ingenuity. Still, there's a kind of nobility in it, a rhythm, a sense of shared purpose. This was not a one-person job. This was a village affair, a seasonal ritual in which everyone had a role. The making of ice wasn't just chemistry or architecture, it was community. You step back and take in the full picture. The pool, the walls, the path leading toward the yakchal in the distance. It's a system, compact, deliberate, strangely beautiful in its restraint. You look up. The sky is deepening. Now, a gentle blush of evening stretching over the horizon. A soft wind stirs the dust. Somewhere nearby, someone is lighting a lantern, the scent of smoke curling into the breeze. Your guide stands and wipes his hands on his robe. "Come," he says, "the Faluda is melting." You follow, and behind you, the desert forgets, as it always does. The path now curls gently back toward the village, though village might be too generous a term. It's more like a cluster of mud brick homes nestled together like huddling cats, each sun-baked wall leaning just slightly inward, as if whispering secrets to its neighbor. There's a smell in the air, roasted nuts, rosewater, and something else, something cold. You follow your guide past a low archway, ducking your head instinctively. On the other side, a shaded courtyard opens like a hidden garden. Vines climb up latticework walls. A stone basin bubbles quietly in the center, fed by one of the Kanat channels you've come to admire so deeply. And resting on a table draped with embroidered cloth sits a copper bowl. Inside is your reward, a serving of falude. Now, if you're imagining a modern dessert, maybe a neat scoop with a mint sprig, you're delightfully mistaken. This is no Instagram parfait. This is history disguised as dessert. Falude is one of the oldest known frozen sweets in the world, dating back at least 2,000 years. And while its modern cousin, the sorbet, gets all the press, Faluda quietly holds its own with grace and chill. You take a seat on the cushion provided, cross-legged, like someone born to wait patiently for ice. Your guide offers you a spoon carved from wood and gestures with something like pride. Try it before the rosewater fades. And so you do. The first bite is surprising. The vermicelli noodles are thin and translucent, made from starch and chilled, until they've reached an oddly delightful chew. The syrup, infused with rosewater and sometimes lime, seeps through the tangle like poetry. The ice crystals crunch gently between your teeth, and for a moment, everything is still. This dish isn't just cold, it's clever. It was stored in the yakchal just like the ice, and prepared in small batches to match the speed of melting. It's not showy, it's not sweet for the sake of sweetness. It's balance, texture, temperature, a kind of edible punctuation mark to a long hot day. Historians still argue whether falude was originally a luxury for nobles or a street-side treat for the masses. Some believe it was a festival food, only served during Nowruz, the Persian New Year, when families gathered to celebrate renewal and rebirth with icy freshness. Others point to evidence that even labourers might share bowls of it after long days. Stacking ice in the domes. Whatever the truth, you can understand why it endured. You can see it. An oasis town, lit by lanterns, where elders and children alike sit under the stars with cold bowls in their hands, the chill of ice paired with the perfume of rose petals. A donkey brays somewhere nearby, as if to remind you that, yes, this is still a working village, not a museum. Your guide, now reclining with his own bowl, grins softly. They say Alexander the Great tasted faluda when he passed through here, he says, licking his spoon. He liked it so much, he forgot to burn something down. You chuckle. You doubt that's historically accurate. But wouldn't it be something? The bowl is nearly empty now, just a puddle of rose-scented syrup at the bottom. You drink it anyway. No regrets. There's a young girl sweeping near the edge of the courtyard, humming a tune you don't recognize. She glances up, offers a half smile, and goes back to her rhythm. It's clear that ice making, faluda serving, and quiet afternoon sweeping are all part of the same cultural code. Acts of care, handed down like recipes and proverbs. In the corner of the courtyard, you spot a small shelf built into the wall. Resting on it is an ancient clay tablet, faded to near illegibility. Your guide notices you looking and translates without being asked. It says, "He who brings cold in summer brings peace to the gods." That checks out. It wasn't just about comfort. The people who built these systems, who stirred faluda and chiseled ice, weren't just serving desserts. They were restoring balance, reassuring nature perhaps, showing that even in the harshest climate, a little cool could be conjured, and with it, a little peace. You lean back and sigh. The sun is lower now, shadows stretching across the courtyard like cats again, slow and unbothered. A breeze kicks up, carrying with it the scent of wet stone and distant blossoms. Your guide rises, brushing off his robes. He looks toward the far gate where the road continues on, winding past more domes and canals into deeper desert. "There's more to see," he says, "but it won't be as sweet." You smile. That's fair. You thank the family that offered the faluda, even if they only nodded and returned to their chores. The moment was shared, and that's enough. You step through the gate, letting the sun hit your shoulders again. But inside your mouth, there's still a trace of cold. And somehow, that makes the heat feel earned. The path stretches out again, flatter now, like a sigh after a good meal. The village slowly recedes behind you, its domes and courtyards growing smaller with each step, until the only sound is your own footfalls over sandy stone. The taste of rosewater lingers faintly, like the final note of a song you've already forgotten the melody to. Your guide walks just ahead, cloak fluttering lightly with the wind. He doesn't speak for a while. Then, just when you've grown used to the silence, he glances over his shoulder and says, "Did you ever hear about the tax collector who froze to death? In Yazd?" You blink. You're in one of the hottest inhabited places on earth. He smiles, clearly pleased. "Come, I'll show you." You follow, unsure whether you're heading toward a cautionary tale or a punchline. The land dips again and, this time the destination is stranger still. A half-collapsed structure nestled into the side of a bluff. It's not another yakshol, though its thick walls suggest it was built to keep something out or in. Inside, the temperature drops by several degrees. The light becomes dusty and gold. You step carefully. This, your guide explains, was once a saruji storage chamber, a facility that served both as a mini warehouse and as a resting place for ice porters and tax auditors alike. And here, legend has it, a rather arrogant bureaucrat from the capital made the mistake of locking himself inside overnight to guard the summer's ice tribute, hoping to count and inspect every single slab before it was loaded onto the caravan. You can imagine him, robed in silk, fussing with a ledger, muttering about proper tallying, while the locals rolled their eyes and politely excused themselves. By morning, they found him stiff as a popsicle. Historians still argue whether the story is true, your guide says with a shrug, but I prefer to believe it. It feels like something ice would do. You can't help but laugh. Of all the ways to go in a desert, freezing to death might be the most poetic. You run your hand along the interior wall. The plaster here is made of saruj, a waterproof mixture of lime, clay, sand, and goat hair, often used in ancient Persian architecture to line pools and domes. It's smooth and cool, like old marble, and faintly glistens where the light hits it right. The recipe was such a closely guarded secret that entire families specialized in its production, passing it down through generations like heirloom spice blends. You crouch to inspect a shallow groove in the floor. Drainage, your guide says. Or maybe just for mice. Hard to say. It's these little architectural quirks that make everything feel so real. You can picture the bustle, ice being dragged across groaning carts, men in loose shirts counting. Out copper coins, someone shouting about a shipment gone missing. And somewhere, always, a kid trying to sneak a handful of snow into his shirt. The storage chamber also had a secondary function that surprises you. It was a message drop. Caravans headed west, toward Persepolis or beyond, often stopped here to pick up sealed messages kept cool in clay vessels alongside the ice. Some included herbs or ointments that needed cold to survive the trip. Others, according to scattered records, carried diplomatic gifts made of candied rose petals or powdered pearls. Not your typical post office, but it worked. Your guide pulls out a small, broken tagine-shaped lid from a niche in the wall and turns it over in his hands. "Found this here last year," he murmurs. "Still smells faintly of cinnamon." You take it from him and sniff. Sure enough, a trace of something warm and sweet clings to the clay. It's like smelling memory itself. Outside, the wind shifts again. A new scent wafts in. Burning brush, perhaps, or someone preparing spiced tea. It reminds you that the day is winding down, even if your legs haven't quite caught up yet. You step back into the sunlight, eyes squinting. The chamber fades behind you, like a mirage unraveling. Your guide chuckles. "That man," he says, referencing the frozen tax collector, again, was probably trying to enforce the royal policy on ice parity. You raise an eyebrow. "Ah, yes," he continues. "There was once a rule. Any city storing ice was required to donate a portion to the palace stockpile each year. But you know how desert cities feel about giving up their cold." He pauses dramatically. "It caused wars." Okay, not real wars. Probably more like frosty arguments. But you take the point. Ice was power. Ice was politics. And anyone who thought it was just dessert hadn't been paying attention. As the sun begins its slow descent behind the hills, you realize something else. The entire Persian ice system wasn't just clever engineering. It was an ecosystem, an economy. A whole way of life balanced on the razor-thin edge between too hot and just cold enough. You follow your guide toward the next hill, knowing there's more to come. But for now, you walk in the cooling air, your feet lighter, your breath slower, and a strange thought bouncing around your head. You might not survive a night in a yakchal, but you die happy, dreaming of rosewater and old tax scandals. The path coils once more, narrower now, hugging a stony ridge as you climb. The land to your right drops off sharply into a dry basin, where shadows deepen like spilled ink. And, just ahead, beyond a cluster of tamarisk trees, you see it, an old caravanserai, squatting on the earth like a tired tortoise. Its walls are tall but uneven, patched over generations with mismatched bricks and sun-bleached wood. The arched entryway has lost much of its shape, crumbling gently into an awkward triangle. But still, it stands. Still, it waits. Your guide pushes open the heavy door, which creaks just enough to feel theatrical, and you step inside a dim courtyard, surrounded by stone chambers. Overhead, the sky shows through in broken slices. Pigeons roost in the rafters, and in the middle, right where the light hits best, lies an odd little sculpture. A half-melted ice slab resting in a wide copper tray, shimmering faintly. "Don't worry," your guide says, seeing your confused look. "It's symbolic ice. We don't keep the real stuff here anymore. Of course not. The real ice was always transient, but its role in places like this, permanent. Caravanserais were the beating hearts of long-distance trade routes, rest stops for merchants, pilgrims, scholars, and yes, the occasional smuggler with a suspiciously chilly satchel. And while most travelers came for food, shelter, or maybe a place to water their camels, the ice, that was a luxury, a whisper of comfort from another world. You wander into one of the smaller rooms lining the courtyard. It's dark, but cool. The kind of cool that hugs your skin without asking permission. A stone bench runs along one wall, and you can picture someone stretched out here, eyes closed, listening to the distant clink of camel bells and the quiet gossip of strangers. In fact, ice was often used in these stops not just to cool food, but to signal prestige. If a host could offer you something chilled, a beverage, a poultice, even dampened cloths for the face. They were telling you, you matter. You've arrived somewhere that respects the journey. One account from a Chinese merchant in the 8th century describes arriving at a Persian caravanserai during midsummer and being handed a bowl of sweet milk cooled with ice. He called it a miracle in a clay cup. Historians still argue whether this was poetic exaggeration or a rare but genuine indulgence made possible by cross-regional ice caravans. Either way, it paints a vivid picture. In a world where travel meant sandstorms, saddle, sores, and suspicious stew, one mouthful of chilled comfort could turn you into a lifelong devotee. Your guide lights a small oil lamp. This one used to hold the cold room, he says, gesturing to another chamber, for perishable goods and secret meetings. And once, I think, a tiger cub. You don't ask. The cold room concept is fascinating. Essentially, an early version of refrigeration achieved through thick walls, underground placement, and ice transported in by teams of porters. It didn't last long, usually only a few hours each day, but it was enough to preserve goat cheese, cool delicate herbs, or keep medicinal ingredients viable on long journeys. You picture it now, bundles of mint, saffron, and dried limes arranged around blocks of ice wrapped in straw, a merchant gently brushing frost from a crate of pomegranates, a physician measuring powdered myrrh with exacting care, noting how its potency holds better at lower temperatures. In the far corner, there's a niche carved into the wall with faint decorative tilework, blue and gold, though faded now. The pattern spirals inward, like ice melting in reverse. Below it, a shallow stone basin, dry and cracked. They say, your guide offers softly, that poets used to dip their hands here before writing. You raise an eyebrow. To cool the blood, he explains, tapping his wrist. So the words would flow slower, more gently. It's probably nonsense, but part of you wants it to be true. You can almost feel the chill spreading up your own arm, slowing your thoughts, wrapping them in silk and shadow. A merchant might stop here for a night, a poet for a week, a spy for just long enough to send a message hidden in a parcel of saffron. And always, quietly, behind the scenes, the ice did its work. Back in the courtyard, your guide points to a small dome at the rear of the building. That was their personal yakchal, he says. Smaller than the city ones, but deep, and they only filled it once a year. You peer through the iron grate covering the entrance. It's dark inside, the kind of dark that swallows shapes. A ladder descends into a pit lined with black stone. A few rusted tools lie at the edge. Ice tongs, perhaps, or something more dramatic. I wouldn't go down there, your guide warns gently. Snakes, of course. Every magical place has to have a guardian, doesn't it? You step back, adjusting your bag. The courtyard seems more alive now. Echoes of laughter, clinking spoons, a merchant arguing over dried dates. All of it warmed slightly by the memory of something cold. One final detail catches your eye. A faded inscription above the inner gate. The script curls like smoke. Roughly, your guide translates, it means, to pass through here is to borrow the coolness of the mountains. It's beautiful, a quiet acknowledgement that everything, the ice, the knowledge, the craft, was a gift stolen gently from nature, just long enough to make the desert feel like home. You take one last look at the stone basin, at the imagined poet's handprint on its rim, and you wonder, if you dipped your fingers there now, what might you write? The late afternoon light softens as you leave the caravanserai behind, the scent of crushed thyme and warm earth trailing with you like an invisible cloak. Your feet crunch over loose gravel, the landscape stretching wider and flatter, inviting a slower pace. It's a good moment to breathe deeply, to feel the dry air fill your lungs, and maybe wonder how something as simple as ice could make such a difference in this place. Ahead, your guide gestures toward a low hill, crowned by a circular structure, half buried in sand. It's an unusual sight, a yakchal unlike any you've seen before. Instead of the classic conical shape tapering into the sky, this one sprawls horizontally, more like a giant ancient igloo sunken into the earth. This was a steppe yakchal, your guide explains, one built with terraces descending inwards, designed to trap the cold and reduce evaporation in a clever play of geometry and shadow. Its walls, made from the same heat-resistant sarouge plaster, are thicker than usual here, layered with clay bricks and covered in straw mats for extra insulation. You crouch at the entrance, peering into the cool darkness. The air inside feels different, thick with silence, almost like a secret breathing space beneath the desert's heat. It's easy to imagine the ice blocks stored here, gleaming faintly under torchlight, slowly melting in a way that almost felt deliberate, like nature herself was taking her time. What's particularly fascinating, your guide says, is that this yakchal had a dual purpose. Besides ice storage, it doubled as a place for making falude, an ancient Persian dessert that you might call a rosewater sorbet, with noodles made from starch. It was one of those sweet, delicate treats reserved for special occasions or to cool down dignitaries during long summer nights. You can almost taste it now, the faint floral sweetness, the light crunch of the noodles, the subtle chill that slides over your tongue like a gentle breeze. Historians still debate whether the techniques for making faluda developed specifically to make use of these cooling structures, or if the desserts were simply adapted to the climate. Either way, it's a reminder of how culture and climate co-evolved, shaping each other like dance partners in the desert heat. Your guide pulls out a small clay cup from his pack. Want to try a modern take? He asks, handing it over. The eye. Contents are a translucent pink gel, cool and slightly floral. You take a sip, savoring the cool relief and the touch of something ancient bottled in a cup. Nearby, the walls are etched with faded graffiti, scribbled names, dates, even a sketch of a camel balancing what looks like a giant ice block on its back. It's hard not to smile. Even centuries ago, people were marking their territory with art and humor, much like the way travelers today leave footprints and Instagram posts. You pause to look at one particularly crisp inscription in Old Persian script. It mentions a festival held here once a year when the ice was first delivered from the mountains. They called it Yak Ruz, the Ice Day. On that day, villagers would gather to watch the ice being unloaded, to share stories, and to enjoy the cool desserts made fresh from the frozen blocks. There were contests to see who could carry the largest chunk of ice, and singing to drown out the harshness of the heat. The idea of an ice day in a desert seems almost whimsical, like a dream conjured by people desperate for relief. But it also speaks to the way ice was more than just a commodity. It was a cultural event, a symbol of hope and endurance. You imagine the celebrations, children chasing each other with dripping chunks of ice, elders sipping on spiced wine cooled with frost, poets composing verses about the fleeting nature of cold in a place where the sun ruled unchallenged. It makes you wonder how many traditions like this have been lost to time, swallowed by sand, or forgotten in the flicker of a flame. Your guide taps a finger against the wall. Every yakchal has stories hidden in its walls, he says quietly. Sometimes you just have to listen. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, you feel a soft coolness creeping up from the earth beneath your feet. A quiet reminder that even in the harshest places, coolness can be found if you know where to look. The evening settles in like a gentle lullaby, the horizon fading from fiery orange to a soft lavender. Your footsteps slow, the desert's hush settling around you like a warm blanket. The cool breeze carries a faint scent of jasmine and wood smoke, a reminder that civilization isn't too far off, even here amid these ancient ice-keeping marvels. Tonight, your guide leads you toward a small village perched near the base of a distant mountain range. This village is special, not for its size or splendor, but for its unique role in the grand Persian ice trade. It's a winter harvesting hub. You wouldn't expect the desert to have a winter at all, but up here, at the right altitude, frost forms during the coldest nights, and the people of this village knew how to harvest it. The practice is called yakbandi, or ice harvesting. a delicate, patient process of collecting natural ice and snow before the sun can claim it. You follow your guide past narrow alleys lined with mud brick houses, their flat roofs thick with straw and coated in white plaster to reflect the sun. The villagers are preparing for the night's harvest. Men and women, young and old, gather around shallow stone pools filled with water. These are the bandas, shallow basins designed to freeze overnight. When morning comes, a thin sheet of ice forms on top, ready to be scraped off with wooden tools and stored in insulated pits or yak chals. You watch as a woman carefully glides a wooden scraper over the frozen surface. The ice comes up in thin, translucent sheets, delicate as paper. She places them gently into baskets lined with straw, stacking them with the care of an artist handling fragile glass. This ice isn't just water turned solid. It's a treasure, a symbol of community skill and harmony with nature. The whole village depends on this ritual for the upcoming hot months. Historians still debate whether this ice harvesting tradition originated independently here or was influenced by northern cultures with colder climates. Some argue it's a local innovation born from necessity, while others believe trade and cultural exchange along the Silk Road brought these techniques southward. You're fascinated by the idea that while the desert sun beats down mercilessly, there are people here who harness the very cold of the night to bring relief months later. Your guide gestures toward a large sunken pit nearby. This is the cow, the communal ice storage pit, lined with thick layers of straw and often built underground to take advantage of natural insulation. Ice is packed tightly inside, with every crevice filled to prevent air pockets that would accelerate melting. The pit is covered with wooden planks and layers of earth during the day, preserving the coolness like a giant thermos. You imagine the villagers gathering here during scorching afternoons, retrieving shards of ice to cool their tea or soothe. The fevered brow of a child, the simple pleasure of cold water, rare and precious. Nearby, children run laughing with small blocks of ice, their faces alight with the magic of something as simple as frozen water. You remember your own childhood, where ice was just a convenience, something taken for granted. But here, it's a seasonal gift, a reminder of patience, of cycles, and of the delicate balance between sun and shadow. Your guide shares an intriguing detail. In some villages, the ice pits doubled as communal coolers for foodstuffs like pomegranates, dates, and preserved meats. The arrangement helped extend the freshness of the harvest and was vital to surviving the intense summers. You notice the walls around the pit are decorated with carvings, simple geometric patterns, crescent moons, and stylized stars. It's almost as if the villagers saw the ice as a celestial blessing, a piece of night sky brought down to earth. As the moon rises, silvering the village rooftops, you realize that this ice harvesting is a communal ritual, an annual promise of resilience. The way the people here live and thrive is a testament to human ingenuity and adaptation. Before you leave, your guide offers you a small cup of warm milk infused with cardamom and rose petals. He smiles and says, "The best way to appreciate cold is to feel warmth after." You nod, savoring the gentle contrast and the moment's quiet beauty. The next morning, the sun rises softly over the village, casting long shadows that stretch like sleepy cats across dusty courtyards. You join the early risers, following your guide toward the outskirts, where the real magic of ice making in the Persian desert begins. Here, at the foot of a rugged mountain slope, ancient water channels, qanats, carve their way through the earth. These subterranean tunnels are marvels of engineering, channeling cool, fresh mountain water across arid lands to sustain life far from the peaks. Your guide explains that these qanats also played a crucial role in traditional ice-making methods. At night, when the air temperature dropped sharply, shallow pools fed by qanat water would freeze on the surface, creating thin sheets of ice. You watch a group of villagers tending these pools, carefully scraping the ice off as the dawn light warms their backs. The ice, still cool and pristine, is stacked in straw-lined baskets, ready to be transported. Historians still debate whether the freezing of qanat-fed pools was an intentional technique developed by Persians or a natural happenstance harnessed opportunistically. The ingenuity lies in the understanding of water's behavior and the delicate timing of harvesting before the heat returns. The method is deceptively simple but demands patience and precision. Too early, and the ice won't have fully formed. Too late, and the sun will have claimed it. It's a dance between man and nature, one that has repeated itself for centuries. Your guide smiles and points to an elaborate wooden pulley system nearby, designed to lift the ice baskets up the slope towards storage pits. It's a clever solution to the steep terrain, allowing the heavy ice to be moved with less strain. Nearby, women prepare sharbat, a cooling drink made from fruit syrups and herbs, served over crushed ice. The sweet scent of rosewater mingles with the sharp freshness of mint. You accept a cup and take a slow sip, feeling the cold trickle down your throat like a gentle stream. The interplay between ice and water here isn't just practical, it's poetic. Water sustains life, ice tempers the harshness of the desert, and together they create a rhythm of survival and comfort. You notice carved symbols etched into the walls near the pools, stars, moons, and geometric patterns. Some suggest these were ancient blessings for good harvests and safe travels, while others think they were simply decorative. There's even a whispered tale among locals about a hidden chamber beneath the Qanat system, where the first Persian ice makers conducted secret rituals to ensure the ice would form perfectly each year. Historians remain skeptical but intrigued. As you prepare to leave the pools behind, the morning sun warming your face, you can't help but admire the subtle genius in these methods. Here, in the margins of the desert, people found a way to capture cold from the night, turning fleeting frost into a lasting gift. It's a reminder that even in the hottest places, there's always a shadow of coolness waiting to be found. Sun has begun its familiar climb, and with it comes the slow but certain creep of heat across the land. You shield your eyes as you follow your guide down a narrow pebbled trail that veers away from the mountain-fed pools and toward flatter, more barren ground. It doesn't seem like much at first, just cracked earth and dry brush. But then, you see them. Rows of long, narrow troughs, stretching out like dusty ribbons across the desert floor. These, your guide says, are ice fields. You raise an eyebrow, perhaps picturing something out of the Arctic. But he smiles and adds, the ancient kind. These shallow troughs were part of the outdoor freezing system developed in central Iran and parts of Afghanistan, an extension of the Yakchal technology, but spread across open plains instead of nestled within walls. They're dug in precise lines, aligned to take advantage of the frigid night air during winter months. Water was let into the troughs after sunset. With the desert's dry air and biting cold, the top layer would freeze swiftly, often within a single night. Villagers would then rise before dawn, skim off the ice sheet by sheet, and transfer it, gingerly, reverently, to nearby yakchals or underground pits. It's almost like watching an assembly line, but quieter, more sacred. Everyone works with slow, measured steps, their breath visible in the chilly morning air. There's little talk, just the scrape of wood against ice and the crunch of feet on frost-laced earth. Historians still argue whether the alignment of these troughs was based purely on environmental observation, or if they followed ancient astronomical cues. Some believe the placement mirrored constellations used to predict the coldest nights, turning the fields into silent calendars of the sky. You pause by one empty trough, now dry and cracked, and imagine it shimmering with a thin film of ice, catching moonlight like a mirror. Then there's the matter of insulation. Once collected, the ice was wrapped in tightly woven reed mats, sealed with oil to prevent melting. These bundles were buried or stored with layers of straw, sand, or even animal wool, whatever materials were available to buffer the cold from the day's relentless heat. Your guide chuckles and mentions a peculiar trick from a nearby village. They use sheep dung, dried and powdered, he says. Layered around the ice in sacks. Smelled awful but worked like magic. You try not to imagine how that would affect your afternoon sorbet. Still, it worked, and that's what mattered. Preservation over perfection. Later, you come across the remnants of a simple stone hut, once a lookout point, or perhaps a shelter for the workers who toiled through winter nights. The walls are low, the roof gone, but it's easy to picture. Someone huddled inside, wrapped in rough wool, keeping one eye on the ice and the other on the stars. Inside, scratched faintly on one stone, is a series of tiny notches. A calendar, your guide whispers, marking which nights were cold enough to freeze. There's something humbling in that, a record not of grand battles or dynasties, but of frost, of nights so cold they carved history into stone. You sit on the low wall, letting your body warm in the morning sun, thinking about the discipline required to coax ice from desert air. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't heroic, but it was brilliant. No factories, no electricity, just air, water, time, and a deep understanding of how the world moves. Some of these troughs, your guide tells you, are still used today in remote areas, passed down through generations. Their purpose may have changed, used now to water livestock or serve as simple canals, but the story remains frozen in their shapes. As the sun climbs higher and the ice fields vanish into heat mirage, you feel the contrast sharpen, the brilliance of cold in the heart of fire. The sun is now fully awake, and so are the village birds, chattering from rooftops as you step into a quieter part of town. The yakchal looms ahead, tall and elegant, its dome casting a wide, soft shadow across the sand. But today, you're not going inside it. Instead, your guide leads you to the side, to a small wooden door tucked into the base of the structure. It creaks open to reveal a set of cool stone steps spiraling downward, not into storage this time, but into what once served as the village's ice kitchen. Yes, an ice kitchen. You blink, not quite sure you heard right. But your guide grins and gestures you forward, encouraging your descent into a subterranean chamber that feels immediately different. Moist, cool, and scented faintly with saffron and lime. Here is where the harvested ice was transformed into indulgence. You see smooth counters carved from clay and stone, fitted with shallow bowls and pits. These aren't for cooking with fire, but for chilling, pressing, and shaping. This is the lost art of ancient Persian frozen desserts. Before freezers, before air-conditioned cafes, there were these quiet chambers, places where luxury was born from patience and knowledge. The most famous creation here, faluda, an icy treat made from semi-frozen syrup mixed with thin noodles made from rice starch. It sounds unusual, but you're assured it's delicious. Think of it as the ancient ancestor of a snow cone. If the snow cone had culinary flair and centuries of tradition behind it, the syrup would be cooled with shaved ice, then mixed with rose water, lime juice, and sometimes sour cherry extract. The resulting mixture was pressed into a metal mold, then placed near blocks of ice, swaddled in insulation, and left to set. You can almost hear the quiet clink of metal bowls, the soft scrape of spoons, the low murmur of women discussing proportions, like sacred spells. This was the domain of ice artisans, not chefs in the modern sense, but preservationists of joy, and it wasn't just faluda. The Persians also made early versions of sorbet, called sharbat, using ingredients as refined as crushed violets, barberries, or powdered lotus root. Some of these concoctions were believed to have cooling properties beyond temperature, calming the liver, soothing the spirit, balancing the humours. Historians still debate how widely this ice dessert practice was spread. Was it confined to elite households and royal courts, or did humble villages like this one also get to indulge? The physical remnants are scarce. Wood rots and recipes were oral traditions, but the stories persist. A quirky tidbit: in some regions, they even tried mixing in edible gold leaf, believing it enhanced the cooling essence of the dessert. You're not sure how that worked, but you're willing to admit it sounds glamorous. Your guide pulls out a small wooden ladle and offers you a taste of modern faluda. made just as it was in those days. The slivers of ice melt slowly on your tongue, followed by the tang of lime and the soft perfume of rosewater. You're stunned by how refreshing it is, especially considering the minimal tools required to make it. You imagine how prized this would have been in a world where ice was precious. A bowl of Faluda wasn't just a treat, it was a triumph. Proof that the harsh desert could be tamed, just a little, through human effort and imagination. As you sip the last of your treat, your guide tells you about traveling dessert caravans, vendors who would carry cool delicacies to wealthy patrons across Persia. They used insulated clay jars, packed with layers of ice, traveling mostly at night to avoid the day's melt. Like medieval ice cream trucks, minus the jingle. You both laugh at the idea, picturing a camel with bells, trudging through sand with sherbet on its back. As you rise to leave the ice kitchen, a cool breeze follows you up the stairs, an invisible souvenir of the genius at work below. You step back into the sunlight, holding on to the idea that even in a place of scorching heat, humanity has always found ways to savor something cool, delicate, and sweet. You stroll along the village's edge, where the compact clay homes begin to thin, giving way to gardens that, surprisingly, thrive in the desert. It's here that the Yakchal's influence stretches beyond just keeping desserts cold or storing water. Ice, you're about to discover, shaped how people planned their meals, structured their days, and even healed their ailments. You arrive at a shaded pavilion where a cluster of elders lounges on woven mats. They're sipping tokmi sharbati, a cooling drink made from basil seeds and chilled water. The seeds swirl lazily in the glass, looking like tiny floating moons. You're offered a cup, ice bobbing gently at the surface, and settle in. The conversation drifts to a time before modern medicine, when cold was more than comfort. It was cure. Long before thermometers or refrigerators, Persian healers practiced tibi sonati, or traditional Persian medicine, which categorized foods and temperaments by hot and cold qualities. Ice wasn't just pleasant, it was medicinal. Cooling the body, they believed, helped restore balance when one's internal fire flared too high. So what did this look like in practice? Say you had a fever. The village healer might mix ice water with crushed willow bark and soak a cloth to, press gently to your forehead. Or if your liver was too hot, and yes, that was an actual diagnosis, you'd be prescribed a chilled pomegranate syrup with ice shavings, taken slowly over the course of an afternoon. One unusual remedy, mixing snow with vinegar and sugar to treat nosebleeds. Another, placing small ice cubes wrapped in fig leaves under the armpits to break a high fever. Historians still argue how effective these treatments were by modern standards, but the philosophy remains fascinating. Healing wasn't just about herbs or chance. It involved manipulating temperature in deeply strategic ways. Cold had character. You glance over at a collection of clay amphorae, their wide mouths sealed with wax. These once held cold potions for summer use, made with ingredients like rhubarb, sour cherry, or a rare seed that supposedly whispers to the body's inner fire, coaxing it to quiet. There's something remarkably intuitive about it all. In a place where heat could be dangerous, even fatal, the ability to store ice wasn't just luxurious, it was life-saving. And then there's food. You step into a sunken kitchen, cooler than the homes above, where clay shelves hold metal trays of yogurt, soft cheeses, and bowls of mint-infused pickled cucumber, kept crisp and cold even in the desert. These weren't just preserved. They were crafted to be eaten cold, pairing with warm stews to balance the body's internal rhythm. One fringe discovery? A recipe found carved faintly into the side of a stone near Yazd, referencing a chilled apricot stew served cold as part of a cleansing fast. Modern chefs aren't rushing to recreate that one, but it shows just how far back the idea of cold cuisine stretches. Your guide hands you a bowl of mastokia, cold yogurt mixed with cucumber, raisins, walnuts, and herbs. You taste it. It's creamy, bright, and deeply refreshing. And more than that, It feels like an antidote to the air's heat. Even the animals got in on the ice action. Wealthy merchants would freeze water in shallow troughs for their pack animals to drink from during long caravans, especially in the July heat. A detail that feels oddly considerate and rather fancy for a camel. By now, the sun has begun to drop, just slightly, behind a nearby hill. The shadows stretch again, softening the edges of the buildings. You stand, cooled from the inside out, and realize the brilliance of what you've seen. Ice wasn't just a status symbol. It was integrated, essential, and in some ways, sacred. A tool for survival disguised as indulgence. You crunch the last basil seed between your teeth and watch the wind pick up little whirlwinds of dust at the edge of the garden. There's still more to explore, but for now, you're content, a little chilled, and entirely impressed by what a handful of frost can mean in a desert. Evening descends slowly, as if the sun itself is reluctant to leave the horizon. You walk through a cluster of homes now, humming with quiet domestic life. Small fires being lit for dinner, children playing under stringed lanterns, and the smell of saffron rice drifting from open windows. But tonight, your destination is a little different. Your guide waves you toward the edge of the village again, this time to a gathering circle where stories, not just meals, are preserved. You're here to learn about the myths, folk tales, and superstitions that ice inspired across Persian history. Because, of course, when a culture learns to harvest frozen water in a place where the sun rules with an iron fist, some stories are bound to sprout. You settle onto a low cushion, feet tucked under you, as the village storyteller, a man with a voice, like gravel rolled in honey, begins to speak. The tale he tells first is about Arjang-e-Sefid, the white giant, a legendary figure said to guard the deepest mountain ice caves. According to the tale, Arjang appears only on the coldest nights of the year, wrapped in frost-covered robes and trailing a beard made of falling snow. He is neither kind nor cruel, only ancient, and he will help a lost traveler if they can answer a riddle about balance and heat. Get it wrong and you vanish into mist. It's not exactly a bedtime story, but it has a sleepy cadence, and it shows just how deeply ice, even in myth, was respected. It was seen as something alive, stoic, powerful, mysterious. Next comes the story of Nilufar, a woman born from the last snowflake of spring. She carried coolness in her hands, which could calm fevered children or cool a meal with a single touch. Villagers would leave rosewater and bits of ice out for her during the hottest nights, in return for dreams chilled and sweet. You smile. Superstitions or not, it feels oddly comforting, imagining a spirit who might slip you a cold drink in your sleep. Historians still debate how many of these tales were truly ancient and how many emerged after yakchols became more common. Some argue that the myths helped preserve knowledge. The riddle of Arjang, for example, is suspiciously similar to the calculations needed for building a proper yakchal: angle, depth, orientation, insulation. But even if embellished, these stories reflect something important, that ice wasn't just matter, it was meaning. One fringe tale stands out. Your guide tells it quietly, almost conspiratorially. The legend of the desert mirror. Supposedly, there was once a slab of pure mountain ice, so perfectly flat and clear, it reflected the sky at night. Pilgrims believed that if you looked into it during the winter solstice, you could see the year ahead, not in detail, but in feeling. Warm, cold, safe, dangerous. It was a feeling mirror, not a seeing one. It's likely apocryphal, but you find yourself wishing it were true. Even the daily rituals of ice had a hint of the sacred. In some households, the first block of ice shaved each season was sprinkled with saffron and broken with a prayer. May it carry away the fever of summer, they would say. Later, as evening darkens fully, you're led to a roof terrace where you lie back with a glass of mint tea, yes, chilled, and gaze up at a sky spilling with stars. A cool breeze rolls in from the distant mountains, brushing your cheeks like the breath of Nilufar herself. The stories linger like condensation on glass, delicate, fleeting, but undeniably there. As you close your eyes, you realize that these myths, these sleepy fables of snow spirits and riddle giants, served another purpose too. They made the impossible feel intimate. Ice wasn't just harvested, it was invited, honored, tucked gently into the folds of everyday life until even the cold had a heartbeat. You wake gently to the sounds of dawn birds stirring again. The desert breeze cool for just a fleeting moment longer. But today, you're heading beyond the village, following a well-worn footpath that once served a more ambitious purpose. You're going on the ice route, a trade path not just for silk or spices, but for that most improbable of desert commodities, ice itself. The journey begins with a pair of donkeys, each saddled with woven packs and small clay containers, the ancient equivalent of insulated coolers. Your guide, a wiry man with an easy laugh, adjusts your pack and smiles. "We're going to follow the cold," he says. Ice was rarely hoarded. It was shared, sold, even exported, by camel, mule, or man, especially during summer festivals, weddings, or royal visits. Towns with successful yakchals could trade ice to nearby settlements that weren't so lucky. The logistics, fascinatingly precise. You walk in the cool of morning as the guide explains. Ice was usually moved before sunrise, packed in thick felt or straw, and sealed in clay jars rubbed with beeswax for insulation. These jars were buried partway into mule packs to slow melting even more. The journey would last hours, sometimes days, and if you reached your destination with more than a puddle, you were something of a hero. Historians still argue how far this kind of ice trade extended. Some suggest that during the Achaemenid era, royal stations were established every 20 miles between major cities to allow for safe ice handoffs. Others believe the trade was local, intimate, neighboring villages, not empires. Regardless, this particular path you walk today once connected two major oasis towns. And yes, it's dotted with the remnants of caravan stops, some barely visible, others still shaded by ancient tamarisk trees. One of the more unexpected detours? A stop at a well-used shrine to an obscure desert saint, Baba Sa'd. His name literally means Father Cold, and while scholars debate whether he was a real person or a mythical chill-bringer, people still leave offerings, coins, mint leaves, and occasionally little bowls of water with a single ice cube floating inside, symbolic and probably very short-lived. As midday approaches, your guide shows you how travelers kept themselves cool along the way, not just by shade, but with dampened scarves, portable, canopies made from silk dyed light colors, and water skins swaddled in damp linen to encourage evaporation. Ancient Persian air conditioning, basically. There's even a quirky tradition called namakdan bardar, or salt-taking, where traders would place a chunk of salt on their tongues while walking in the heat. The goal? To trigger thirst more, gradually, and keep you sipping steadily, not guzzling and dehydrating yourself. You try it. It's not refreshing, but strangely helpful. The best part of this journey isn't the landscape, though the rolling sand dunes are certainly cinematic. It's imagining the people who walked here before. A young merchant delivering iced rose sherbet to a bride's family. An old woman carrying a single block of mountain snow to sell at a roadside stand. A child tagging along, clutching a lump of cold like a secret. And yes, some blocks of ice didn't make it. Your guide recounts the story of one particularly tragic shipment meant for a royal banquet that arrived as a sloshing, syrupy mess. The royal chef salvaged it by inventing a warm honey drink that's now a staple in winter markets. Accident meet legacy. As you finally crest the hill into the neighboring town, a small boy runs to greet your guide. The boy's family still runs the tiny ice stand there. 2 ceramic jars under a shaded awning, one filled with sour cherry sharbat, and another with sweetened cucumber water. You drink both. They taste like travel and effort. You're reminded, once again, that even in the harshest conditions, People find a way not just to survive, but to make something beautiful, cold, fleeting, and shared. And as the sun dips lower, casting long golden shadows across the trade path behind you, it's easy to imagine that somewhere, back in time, another traveler just like you was doing the same, delivering ice, carving, out chill in the desert, and wondering whether the cool would last until nightfall. Night falls again as you settle into a courtyard that hums with quiet celebration. You're back in the first village now, where, as luck would have it, you've arrived during the midsummer festival known as Shabby Sard, or the Cold Night. It's a paradox, of course. The air still clings warm to your skin, and the sandstones underfoot radiate the sun's heat like old memories. But the celebration isn't about temperature, it's about gratitude. This is the night where the community thanks the ice. It begins with a quiet procession to the Yakchal, now lit by soft lanterns strung like fireflies across the courtyard walls. Families gather at its base, placing tiny tokens at the entrance, bundles of dried basil, glass beads, and once, you notice, a carefully folded napkin with a single sugar cube inside. These offerings aren't exactly religious, they're cultural, historical, practical even. An ancient thank you note to the builders, the diggers, the mathematicians who figured out the angle of a wind catcher just right. And yes, to the structure itself. A giant mud and straw cone that somehow, still, feels a little magical. Children pass around chilled melon slices. The older kids pull icy mulberry syrup from a jar and mix it with milk for a sleepy drink that tastes like night itself. You're handed a bowl of something bright green and floral. Khaki sher, a drink made from seeds soaked in ice water, flavored with rose and honey. It's delightfully slimy, a texture somewhere between bubble tea and herbal medicine. And then the music starts. It's soft at first. Hand drums and a wind instrument made from a reed that somehow mimics the whistle of a breeze tumbling through a canyon. You close your eyes. The rhythm doesn't demand attention. It gently claims it. Historians still argue whether Shabby Sard existed in formal antiquity or emerged later during the Safavid era when public festivals gained popularity. But whatever its age, its meaning is clear. Celebrating human tenacity in the face of heat, honoring ingenuity disguised as mud domes. You think back to everything you've learned. The Yakchal as a feat of physics. The ice itself as medicine, memory, and metaphor. The traders who walked dusty paths with frozen treasure hidden in straw. The stories of snow spirits, of healing figs and vinegar snow, of mirrors that don't reflect, only feel. And now here, people, laughing, clinking glasses, telling old jokes as they sip something impossibly cold under a warm desert moon. It's a kind of joy that isn't flashy or loud. It's joy that's earned. A woman seated next to you leans in and whispers a saying, cold, when shared, never melts too fast. You nod, though you suspect she made it up on the spot. You decide to pretend it's ancient wisdom anyway. Then, as midnight approaches, the final ritual begins. Everyone takes a small piece of ice, carved from a single block and wrapped in silk, and holds it for a few moments in their palms. The idea isn't to keep it, it's to feel it melt. A quiet reminder, nothing lasts, but that doesn't make it less valuable. One child holds theirs too long, shrieking at the cold. Everyone laughs gently. You too feel the drip, drip, drip onto your wrist. It's oddly comforting, as if your body has borrowed something impossibly rare and is letting it go with grace. And that, perhaps, is the point of Shabby Sard. Not to control nature, not to hoard its fleeting gifts, but to marvel, together, at the moments when humans did the improbable, brought winter to summer, coolness to flame, and stillness to the desert's breath. The music fades, the laughter softens, and as the villagers begin to gather their things and head for home, you take one last look at the Yakchal. A pile of earth and clay, yes, but also a monument to patience, collaboration, and quiet brilliance. You head back through the village under the whispering trees, cooled more by memory than air, and think. Cold was never just a temperature here, it was a story. By morning, you're back at the edge of the oasis, the palms rustling like they've been waiting for you to return. But today, the breeze carries a strange scent, faintly floral, faintly sour. As you follow it, you find yourself led not to a kitchen or herb stall, but to a shaded shed filled with rows of wide clay jars sealed with cloth and beeswax. Fermented snow drinks. Yes, you read that right. While modern taste buds might raise a skeptical eyebrow, ancient Persians had a flair for culinary experimentation, and one of their more curious creations was the sharbat-e torsh, or sour snow tonic. At first glance, it looks like an herbal brew, mottled with petals and soft green leaves. But this drink has history behind it. In the cooler months, they'd collect snow or ice from the yakchal, melt it just slightly, and mix it with fruits like unripe plums, sour cherries, or barberries. Add a touch of wild mint or basil seeds, and voila, a naturally tangy, lightly fermented refreshment that could be stored in cool cellars and consumed all summer long. It wasn't quite wine, and it wasn't quite tea. It was something in between. A drink that cooled your blood and gently woke your senses. Historians still argue whether these brews had slight alcoholic content or were simply probiotic from wild fermentation. Either way, they were beloved in elite and everyday households alike. As you take a sip, the flavor is startling, tart like pomegranate molasses, but balanced with a ghost of sweetness. Not exactly pleasant at first, but strangely refreshing, like your mouth just did yoga. These drinks weren't just culinary quirks. They served medicinal roles too. Ancient physicians, particularly during the Sasanian period, believed these fermented snow infusions could correct hot imbalances in the body. Feeling feverish? Try sour snow with coriander. Bloated after a feast? Go for the version with dill and tamarind. One particularly famous mix, snow with dried lime and fennel, was so potent it was said to calm even a warrior's stomach. In one corner of the shed, you notice an older woman carefully sealing a jar with cotton twine. She offers you a spoonful from a smaller pot, nodding as you take it. "This one," she whispers, "has been fermenting since the last frost." The flavor is more complex, less of a drink, more of an edible memory. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Records from medieval cookbooks include notes like, "not to be consumed before long rides," or "requires a strong stomach on summer afternoons." Some communities even turned the drink into frozen slush, stored in shallow metal pans inside the yakchal, an ancient Persian snow cone with a little side of digestive risk. You're reminded again how nothing here is wasted. Even meltwater, even sour fruit, even the breath of a forgotten winter can be turned into something nourishing, or at least amusing. There's also a quirky bit of lore. In one dusty corner of a local epic, a hero named Rostam supposedly regained his strength after battle, not with meat or bread, but with a bowl of cold sour tonic mixed with saffron and snow. The strength of ice, the scribe wrote, entered his veins like returning dawn. Whether true or not, it speaks volumes about how deeply ice, and the things made from it, settled into the cultural imagination. More than a luxury, it was a remedy, a reward, a symbol of control over nature's whims. You finish the last of your cup and thank the woman. She nods again, this time with a sly smile. "Come back in 2 moons," she says. "I'll have one, made with melon rinds and cinnamon bark. Just don't drink too fast, it bites." And with that, you step back into the light, mouth still tingling, and wonder, if this is what ancient people did with snow, what else did they do that we've long forgotten? What other cool, strange comforts once waited behind clay doors and wax seals? You wander back through the village, the warmth of the day pressing gently against your skin like a weighted blanket, when you stumble upon something entirely unexpected. A courtyard filled with children, barefoot, dust-streaked, and screaming with laughter as they chase a rolling ball of what looks like snow. It's not snow, of course. It's shaved ice, scraped meticulously from a stored block inside the yak chal and packed into large round clumps. It melts as they throw it, and that's half the fun. For the briefest of moments, it feels like winter. As you watch, the older kids stops to add something to the snowball. Syrup, maybe, from a little clay pitcher. Then another adds flower petals. Then someone dumps crushed pistachios on top. It's a game, but it's also dessert. Welcome to one of the earliest forms of faluda, an ancient Persian frozen treat, both wildly inventive and utterly soothing. It's not like modern ice cream, and it predates gelato by centuries. The texture is something else entirely. Fine ice crystals tangled with thin, starchy noodles made from rice flour, flavored with rosewater, lime juice, sometimes even vinegar. Syrup for those with a truly bold palate. You're handed a small cup by a grinning boy who gestures for you to eat quickly. Before the sun wins, he says. The ice is soft, almost slushy, and the noodles feel like chilled silk in your mouth. It's weird and perfect. It tastes like the pause before a summer storm. Faluda is one of those things that historians love to debate. Was it invented during the Achaemenid Empire or later in the Sasanian Golden Age? Some trace it to 400 BCE, citing scribbled inventories that mention vermicelli cooled by mountain snow. Others point to the early Islamic cookbooks, where faluda appears in recipes alongside directions for freezing mixtures in shallow pans surrounded by salt and ice. What they do agree on is this: it's spread like wildfire, or more appropriately, like frost. From Persia, versions of faluda made their way to India, becoming faluda, a sweet, milky drink thick with basil seeds and saffron jelly. It danced its way into the Ottoman world too, evolving into icy fruit pastes served in shaded kiosks near mosques. And somewhere along the route, as global trade blossomed, the method of making chilled desserts fused with dairy-rich Italian traditions, giving us a straight line, albeit squiggly, from faluda to gelato to modern ice cream. And yet, here in this quiet courtyard, the dish is as it's always been, served with joy, quickly melting, eaten with sticky fingers and absolute abandon. One elder sitting under a fig tree chuckles as he watches the children. They think they're inventing something new every summer, he says. But we've been freezing noodles longer than Rome's had senators. He's probably not wrong. There's something calming about seeing this cycle play out, an ancient innovation, now a childhood ritual. Ice, noodles, syrup, laughter, repeat. The science behind it may be intricate, balancing salt ratios, mastering wind flow, predicting how water behaves under different moon phases, but the end result is simple: cold, sweet delight. And the moment offers another lesson. For all the impressive mathematics behind a yakchal, for all the imperial logistics of ice transport, and the medical treatises describing snow's cooling properties, sometimes cold is just for joy, for play, for slurping something strange and wonderful before it disappears in the heat. You take another spoonful, it's colder than you expected, and the rosewater hits your tongue like a whisper from a distant garden. Somewhere behind you, a goat bleats at absolutely nothing. A small child falls into a puddle of his own melting treat, giggles, and decides to stay there. Everything in this moment feels both impossibly old and vividly now. And as your cup empties, the sticky sweetness clinging to your fingers and the back of your throat, you realize there is no such thing as a boring dessert. By now, you've tasted the ice, sipped the tonic, and even dodged a few sticky snowballs. But as the shadows stretch long across the baked earth, it's time to turn your thoughts toward the people who made all this cold magic possible. The unsung heroes of ice, the harvesters, the carriers, and the cool room keepers. You step inside, a modest structure, a sort of communal resting area just beside the yakchal, and find a group of older men and women reclining on mats, sipping mint water and rubbing their joints. Their hands are calloused, their tunics damp with the fine white powder of dried salt and dust. These are the labourers of the cold chain. And their story might just be the least chill part of this entire tale. See, maintaining a supply of ice in the middle of the desert was no serene science experiment. It was labour. Relentless, back-breaking labour. At night, you might be sleeping soundly under the stars, but these folks were already on their feet, checking vents, sealing cracks in the Yakchol dome with clay paste, or hauling slats of desert, straw to insulate fresh snow. Some nights, they walked for miles, leading mule caravans out to the base of nearby mountains to collect more ice. Always uphill, always barefoot or in sandals worn smooth as water stones. And once they arrived, it wasn't a leisurely picnic. They hacked and pried at slabs of mountain ice using bronze picks or heavy wooden mallets, then packed the chunks in sawdust or layers of date palm fronds to keep them cool on the return journey. Historians still argue whether these routes were formally mapped or passed on orally, generation to generation. Some ice paths were likely family secrets, guarded like treasure. Others were shared only during religious festivals, when entire communities would pitch in to replenish the local yakchal. And transporting the ice? Well, forget about refrigerated trucks. These carriers relied on speed, shaded paths, and clever wrapping techniques, swaddling the ice in damp wool, then inside baskets lined with clay powder, often carried on donkey back or in wide carts with leather hoods. Timing was everything. A half-hour delay could mean slush instead of solid. The risks weren't trivial either. Slips, sunstroke, and dehydration were constant dangers. You wouldn't think a job built around cold could cause heat stroke, but the desert plays by one's rules. Plus, the job didn't pay much, but it came with other perks, prestige for one. In a hot city, few things earned you more respect than being the person who could conjure ice from thin air. And let's not forget the cool room keepers, those tasked with guarding the yakchol itself. They worked in shifts, monitoring the temperature. Inside, adjusting vents and shading the walls with woven reed mats during the day. They also managed the inventory, deciding who got how much ice, when deliveries would be made, and whether a festival order would deplete the whole dome too quickly. You imagine the drama. A bride's family demanding extra snow for a wedding, feast, a physician pleading for more to treat a feverish patient, a local noble offering double coin to chill his wine jugs before a visiting envoy arrives, and in the middle of it all, the cool room keeper, probably wearing a permanently unimpressed expression, holding the literal keys to the kingdom. Then, there were the quiet rituals of the trade, sprinkling rosewater around the yakchol to bless a fresh batch of ice, tapping the walls 3 times before unlocking the door, an old superstition meant to wake the cold spirits and ask for a safe shift. Whispers of workers who fell asleep inside and were found frozen stiff the next morning. Mostly legend, probably. You sit with the group now, listening to their stories in the dwindling daylight. One man proudly tells you about his grandfather, who once carried a full block of ice from the Alborz range to Kazvin in under a day. Another laughs about how they used to sneak little chunks home to impress their sweethearts. She married. "Me for the snow," he jokes, grinning toothlessly. It's easy to forget, in the romance of ancient engineering, that real hands made this system work. Real backs bent beneath it. And real people, sweating through the same desert you now sit in, turned frozen water into a functioning economy and into joy. And while some of their names might be lost, their fingerprints linger on every smooth dome, every chilled melon slice, every delicate bowl of faluda. As dusk creeps across the sand and the domed silhouette of the yakchal casts a long shadow over the village, you feel something shift. Not in the air, but in the rhythm of life. Around you, the day's work is done. The ice has been stored, the pots scrubbed, the syrup jars sealed tight. Now comes the evening ritual, cooling down, literally and figuratively. A family invites you to join them for what they call Shabe Korda Bath, a night of eating snow. It's not a festival, per se, more like a habit, a good excuse to slow down, pass the time, and gather around something rare. Tonight, that something is a single preserved block of ice, hauled from the Yakchal and cradled like treasure in a wooden basin. As someone carefully scrapes the block into delicate curls, like parmesan on pasta, others scatter around preparing toppings, crushed dried berries, a syrup made from tamarind and honey, even a sort of powdered melon rind that smells suspiciously like sour apple. And of course, rose water, always rose water. You're handed a bowl, the spoon's a bit wobbly, hand-carved from walnut wood, and the ice curls melt faster than you can scoop them. But it's perfect, sweet, tart, bitter, cold, all at once. The conversation drifts, as it always does during moments like this. Someone tells a story about a Yakchal keeper who tried to build a personal ice vault in his basement and ended up flooding his neighbor's goat shed. Another reminisces about a particularly hot year when the town had to ration ice by the spoonful and fights broke out over who got to cool their yogurt. But as the laughter dies down, a quieter voice, a grandmother maybe, begins to speak. She talks about the philosophy of cold, not refrigeration, not cooling strategies. Cold as a feeling, cold as a metaphor. In the desert, she says, cold is a kind of hope. It reminds you that not all things burn, that you can endure. You look around and realize this is true in more ways than one. The ice isn't just a luxury or a clever trick of clay and geometry. It's symbolic. It's resilience frozen into form. In a place where heat dominates, the ability to conjure cold isn't just practical, it's powerful. It says, we refuse to be ruled by the sun alone. Historians still argue whether these nightly rituals were widespread or just pockets of tradition kept alive by stubborn grandmothers and poetic uncles. Some believe the ice was so rare in ancient times that only royalty could afford evening treats. Others argue that Yakchals were surprisingly egalitarian, publicly funded, publicly managed, and open to all in times of need. Perhaps like all things, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But you suspect this part, this exact moment of gathering and gentle story trading, has always been the same. After dessert, someone fetches a tambour, and soft music hums across the warm night air. The notes meander, much like your thoughts. You feel your body loosening. Your feet, dusty and sore, stretched out under you. Your eyes begin to flutter closed, not from boredom, but from that deep, bone-level relaxation that only comes when you know the day has given all it had to give. A small girl plops beside you and offers you another spoonful of ice. You accept, of course. It's slightly saltier this time. Must have been stored near the outer layers. She watches you like a chef awaiting a critique. Good, you say. She beams. Her job here is done. Eventually, people begin to drift off, some to homes, others to mats laid out under the stars. One of the elders carefully rewraps the remaining ice and tucks it into a shaded alcove. Let the moon keep it cool tonight, he mutters. You linger for a while longer, staring up at the deep navy sky where stars have started to punch through like tiny pinholes. You think of the ice, slowly melting even now, and of the people who caught it, kept it, shared it. In a world obsessed with speed and heat and motion, these ancient Persians found a way to press pause, to freeze a moment in time, literally, not to control nature, but to live beside it with a kind of quiet mastery. It makes you wonder what your own version of a Yakchal might be. A notebook you fill in stillness. A walk you take every evening at sunset. A freezer full of mango sorbet. Whatever it is, may it bring you this same sense of cool, calm purpose. You wake, well, not quite wake, but rise into a lighter layer of consciousness, with the first pale shimmer of morning slipping across the horizon. A rooster tries to crow, but gives up halfway, as if realizing it's still too early to bother. Around you, the desert hums softly, like it's holding its breath before the day truly begins. And within the Yakchal, the ice still waits. You shuffle back toward it, half out of curiosity, half because you can't quite believe it's still there. After all, the sun has risen, and the desert doesn't usually grant second chances. But there it stands, dome as silent as ever, mysterious as a moon crater. Today, though, you're not here for science or sweets. You're here to understand how this ancient wonder has survived. Not just the centuries, but the world's obsession with moving on, upgrading, and forgetting. You run your fingers along the outer walls. The mud brick feels cool to the touch, even now, which feels a little like sorcery. But it's not. It's just engineering wrapped in wisdom and a stubbornness that borders on spiritual. Because here's the thing, the Yakchal wasn't simply a structure. It was a philosophy of patience, of thinking not in hours or days, but in seasons, in generations, in cycles of heat and cool, feast and fast, motion and stillness. You picture the architect, the person who first said, "Yes, I'm going to dig a giant pit, shape it like a beehive, align it with the prevailing wind, and trust that it'll still hold ice in July." You imagine the side eyes, the skeptical neighbors, the donkeys that refused to haul one more load of clay. And yet, they did it anyway. Historians still debate whether Yakchals were invented independently or borrowed from even older cultures, Mesopotamians, perhaps, or early Central Asians who dabbled in snow pits lined with reeds. But what's not debated is this. Persia turned the cold house into an art form. And what's most remarkable? Some of them still stand. Right now. Right this moment. Not as museum exhibits or historical reconstructions, as functioning parts of rural life. In places far from neon and Wi-Fi and triple-shot espresso, people still use Yakchals to keep pomegranate molasses from turning, to cool their pickles, to soothe fevers. Some are now reinforced with modern materials, sure, but the soul of the system remains. They don't hum like air conditioners. Don't buzz or beep or require an app. They just exist, quietly doing what they were built to do, even as satellites pass overhead and time barrels on. And there's something intensely comforting in that. You step inside once more, ducking through the low arch. The air hits you like a dream. Still, crisp, faintly sweet with traces of salt and old fruit. You breathe in and feel yourself slow down. Not everything needs to be updated, digitized, or reinvented. Some things, like domes of mud and ash and wisdom, work best when left mostly alone. Your eyes adjust to the dark. Somewhere beneath your feet, ice rests in layers, nestled in straw, waiting to become snow cones or medicine, or simply proof that the impossible can be made real with the right blend of math and stubbornness. You feel no rush to leave. The outside world will catch up eventually. Emails, notifications, that appointment you forgot to reschedule. But not yet. Right now, you're surrounded by cool, purposeful quiet. A kind of hush only earned through centuries of listening, and you can almost hear them. The old builders, the ice haulers, the sleepy desert children crunching frost between their teeth, their voices tucked into the walls, their laughter swirling in the air like dust. They built this so you could rest, and in this moment, you do. Outside, the desert morning takes its time warming up. A donkey shakes its ears. A kettle somewhere begins to murmur on a clay stove. You remain still, content to linger beneath the dome's cool curve a little longer. But even this must end. Not with a bang. Persian ice doesn't do drama. But with a gentle melt. You step back out into the light, blinking. The heat is rising now. The sky stretches open above you, bright and endless. And there's a sense that time is shifting again. From the slow crawl of night to the brisk hum of day. And still, the Yakchal stays behind you, unbothered. There's something quietly heroic about it. Not flashy, not celebrated on postcards, but heroic in its endurance. How many technologies today could survive 1,000 years without electricity or software updates? The Yakchal simply endures because it was designed to belong, not just to the land, but to the rhythm of life itself. You begin to walk back, through the village. The same path you took in the dark now glows gold and tan. dust soft underfoot. The scent of rosewater clings to the air like a memory you don't quite own but somehow recognize, and you start to piece together how ice became more than ice here. It was a way of keeping things, of preserving not only sherbet and milk, but moments, joys, losses, quiet dinners, old arguments about whose syrup recipe was better. The yakchal became a time capsule for a community. And maybe that's what chilled desserts have always been about. A way to remember summer on the coldest day, or to cool down enough to think clearly in the heat. Historians still muse over why Persia mastered the cold so early. Was it the harsh environment that demanded innovation? Was it the cultural emphasis on balance, of hot and cold, sweet and sour, fire and water? Or was it simply the joy of discovering that, yes, you can have snow in July if you're clever enough to build a giant mud dome and convince everyone to pitch in? Probably a bit of all three. You reach the edge of the village. The fields sprawl ahead of you, dotted with fig trees and silvery green tamarisk. The mountains in the distance seem smaller now, less ominous, more like old friends brooding in the background. You sit for a moment beneath an apricot tree. Someone has left a shallow ceramic bowl nearby, half filled with shaved ice and what looks like violet syrup. You steal a bite. It tastes like something halfway between a flower and a memory. Sweet, a little grassy, deeply cool. And as you sit there, spoon in hand, you realize you've learned something unexpectedly profound about ancient Persian ice storage. That it wasn't just about refrigeration. It was about stubborn hope. Quiet, brilliance. The belief that, with enough patience, you could bend nature, not with brute force, but with grace. And when the sun finally arcs high above and the day properly begins, you rise, feeling a little more chilled than the temperature suggests. Not frozen, just tempered, cooled from within. You glance back one last time. The yakchal gleams faintly under the morning sun. Calm, still, unwavering. And you carry that cool with you as you go. Word count, 1048. Wind down, 300 words. Now that our journey through ancient Persia is complete, let your thoughts settle like soft snowflakes on still water. You've wandered through desert sands and stepped inside echoing domes. You've watched the world slow to the hush of cold clay and tasted ice as it once was. Precious, sweet, and slow to melt. Let your breath deepen. Easy now. No need to remember every fact, every name, or every curious custom. Just let the feeling linger. That curious, cooling wonder. That realization that, even in a place where the sun blazed day after day, people found a way to preserve a whisper of winter. Your body is heavy in the best way. The kind of heaviness that says, you've traveled far enough for now. Let your shoulders drop, your jaw soften, your hands rest wherever they've landed. Nothing is asked of you at this moment but stillness. And maybe, just maybe, you can picture your own little yakchal inside your mind. Rounded, calm, resilient. A place to store all that you want to keep cool and safe. Tucked away from the rush, from the noise, from the heat of the everyday. You are not in the desert anymore. You're in that quiet space between waking and dreaming, the soft borderland of sleep. So stay here as long as you need. Breathe in once more. And exhale, slowly. Let the last traces of Persian rosewater, sun-dried bricks, and sweet chilled syrup carry you away.